The smell of roasted turkey filled the house, blending with the sweet aroma of cinnamon pie and baked potatoes as Claire carefully placed the last dish on the dining table. Her hands trembled slightly, not from exhaustion but from nerves. Thanksgiving had never been a peaceful gathering for her family. It was an annual performance where success was flaunted and failures mocked. For Claire, the youngest of three, it always felt like a reminder of how small she appeared in the grand scheme of her family's achievements. Her older brother Ryan was their father's pride, a rising executive at his firm, confident and loud. Her sister Emily was the golden child, recently engaged to a wealthy tech entrepreneur and glowing with self-importance. And then there was Claire, the quiet dreamer, the aspiring novelist who worked part-time at a cafe to pay rent and wrote late into the night, hoping someone someday would read her words. As everyone took their seats, the clinking of silverware and chatter filled the air. Her mother's perfectly painted smile curved toward Claire. "Claire, I hope you didn't bring another one of your creative experiments to the table this year," she said with mock sweetness, making sure everyone heard. A ripple of laughter followed. Claire forced a smile, though inside she felt that familiar sting, the kind that came from years of being dismissed, not for what she did wrong, but for daring to dream differently. Her mother thrived on comparison, and tonight would be no different. The conversation quickly turned into a competition of who was doing better in life. Ryan boasted about his recent promotion, bragging about the bonus he'd received. Emily's eyes sparkled as she flashed her engagement ring for the 100th time, talking about her fiancé's upcoming business trip to Europe. Their father nodded proudly at them both, occasionally adding, "That's my boy," or, "You've made a wise choice." Emily, when the attention momentarily shifted to Claire, she took a breath, trying to sound calm. "I actually finished my manuscript last month," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I've sent it to a few publishers." There was a pause. Then Ryan snorted. "A manuscript? About what? How to make coffee and cry." The table erupted in laughter. Even Emily giggled behind her hand. Claire's chest tightened. She looked at her parents, hoping for a bit of defense, but her mother simply smirked. "Sweetheart," she said, swirling her wine, "writing isn't a career. You're too old to still be chasing childish fantasies. You need something stable. Look at your sister." Claire's fork trembled in her hand. "I'm trying," she said quietly. "I believe in my story." Ryan leaned back, grinning. "You believe too much. Maybe you should believe in getting a real job instead." Another round of laughter followed, and Claire felt her cheeks burn. She wanted to scream, to tell them that she worked harder than they ever knew, that while they slept, she wrote until dawn, pouring every piece of herself into her words. But she knew it wouldn't matter. In their eyes, she was nothing more than the family's disappointment, the girl who wasted her potential on dreams that didn't pay bills. Her mother raised her glass. "Well, to Ryan's promotion and Emily's engagement. Cheers to the future of our family." Everyone clinked glasses, except Claire. She just sat there, hands folded tightly, her heart pounding. No one toasted her. No one even looked her way. After dinner, as laughter filled the room again, Claire stood abruptly. "Excuse me," she muttered, her voice barely audible. She grabbed her coat and slipped outside. The night was cold, and the November wind bit at her skin. For a moment, she just stood there on the porch, staring at the dark horizon, her eyes stinging. Inside, the sound of laughter still carried through the window. She could almost hear Ryan mocking her again, her mother's tone dripping with false concern, Emily's perfect giggle echoing in the background. Claire clenched her fists. The humiliation was familiar, but this time, something inside her shifted. Maybe it was the quiet cruelty of their words, or maybe she had finally reached her limit. She had always swallowed her pride for the sake of keeping peace, but tonight, she realized peace had never existed in this family. It was just control wrapped in politeness. She looked through the window and saw them still laughing, still so certain of their superiority. She wasn't angry at their success anymore. She was angry at how they used it to measure worth. She whispered to herself, "One day they'll regret this. One day they'll see me." Her breath came out in a cloud against the cold air, and when that day comes, they'll beg for my help. She walked to her car, her steps firm, her mind spinning. For years, she had written stories about fictional heroes finding redemption and revenge. Now she felt like one of them, broken, humiliated, but not defeated. As she started the engine, her reflection in the windshield looked different, stronger, sharper. The tears had dried, replaced by quiet determination. That night, when she returned to her small apartment, the air felt different. She didn't collapse into her bed like usual. Instead, she sat at her desk, pulled out her laptop, and opened her manuscript. The words on the screen blurred through her exhaustion, but she kept typing. Every cruel laugh, every insult from that dinner poured into her story like fuel. Her pain transformed into sentences, vivid, powerful, alive. For the first time, her writing wasn't just about escape. It was about justice. By dawn, she had rewritten an entire chapter. She leaned back, eyes heavy but heart lighter. The humiliation from earlier still burned, but now it served a purpose. She knew one day, this story would be her weapon, the proof that dreams weren't foolish. That silence didn't mean weakness. As the first light of morning spilled through her window, Claire whispered again, this time with a smile. One day, they'll beg for my help. And with that, she saved her work, took a deep breath, and began outlining her next chapter, her journey to rise from the ashes of that Thanksgiving night. Months slipped by after that humiliating Thanksgiving night, but the memory of it stayed carved into Claire's mind like an old scar she couldn't forget. Every word, every laugh, every dismissive glance from her family echoed in her head whenever she sat down at her desk. But instead of breaking her, it fueled her. That night had been her awakening. She made herself a promise that she would turn their cruelty into art. That one day, they would read her words and recognize themselves in every line. So she worked. Every morning, she brewed coffee at the small cafe down the street, smiling politely at customers, while her mind buzzed with dialogue and story ideas. Every evening, she came home exhausted but determined, sitting in front of her laptop until the early hours of the morning. The world outside moved on, but Claire stayed in her world of words, chasing a dream no one else believed in. Her manuscript, The Broken Table, became her lifeline. It was raw, emotional, and painfully real, a fictional retelling of a family that mocked their daughter until she broke free. Some nights she cried while writing, her tears hitting the keyboard, but she never stopped. When she finished, she sent her story to dozens of publishers. Weeks turned into months of silence. The few who replied gave her form letters filled with polite rejection. Not the right fit. Doesn't align with our catalog. Good voice, but not marketable. Each rejection stung. But she remembered her mother's voice mocking her. Writing isn't a real career, and that hurt far more. Then one cold January morning, as snowflakes drifted past her apartment window, her email pinged. The subject line read, "Regarding The Broken Table, request for meeting." Her heart stopped. She opened the message, and there it was, a short note from a senior editor at a boutique publishing house. They loved her voice, the realism, the emotion. They wanted to discuss a deal. For a moment, she just stared at the screen, afraid to blink in case it vanished. Then she screamed, startling the neighbor's dog, and burst into tears of disbelief. The following week, she walked into their office, nervous, clutching her worn-out manuscript like a treasure. The editor, a woman named Grace, greeted her with a warm smile. "Claire," she said, "your story isn't just good. It's powerful. It feels lived." Claire could barely speak. She'd spent years being told her dream was foolish. And now someone saw value in the very thing her family ridiculed. Within weeks, the contract was signed. It wasn't a huge advance, but it was validation. Her first taste of being seen. The next months were a blur of deadlines, edits, and sleepless nights. Grace pushed her to dig deeper, to polish every emotion, every sentence. Claire gave it everything. She worked part-time at the cafe, edited chapters during lunch breaks, and reviewed proofs on the bus ride home. When The Broken Table finally went to print, she stood in the bookstore staring at her name on the cover. Claire Daniels. Black letters against a cream background. It felt unreal, like the beginning of a new life. The book launched quietly, but slowly, and readers began to find it. A few early reviews called it honest and devastating. Then a popular blogger shared it, calling it the story every overlooked dreamer needs. Sales exploded overnight. Book clubs discussed it, people quoted her lines online, and suddenly she was being invited to talk shows and podcasts. Her inbox was filled with messages from readers who said her story gave them courage. For the first time in her life, Claire wasn't invisible. She rented a better apartment, bought her first new coat in years, and smiled every time she passed a bookstore window displaying her novel. Still, there was one thing she hadn't done. She hadn't told her family. A part of her wanted to keep her success as her own secret triumph. But the universe had other plans. One evening, her phone rang. The caller ID made her freeze. Mom. She hadn't heard her mother's voice since that awful Thanksgiving. When she finally picked up, her mother sounded hesitant, almost nervous. Claire, honey, we've been hearing so much about you. Your book, it's everywhere. People at church can't stop talking about it. We're so proud of you. The words felt strange coming from her mother's mouth. Pride, where there used to be only scorn. Then came the invitation. We'd love for you to come home for Thanksgiving this year. It won't be the same without you. Claire stared at the phone long after the call ended. Her mind replayed that last Thanksgiving. The laughter, the humiliation, the way she'd walked out into the cold, swearing she'd make them regret it. Now, here they were, inviting her back, eager to bask in her success. She almost said no, but something inside her whispered that this was her chance, not for revenge, but for closure. Thanksgiving came faster than she expected. As she drove up the familiar street, memories flooded back. The house, the porch light, the smell of her mother's cooking drifting into the air. When she stepped inside, her family's reactions told her everything. Her father hugged her stiffly, awkwardly proud. Her mother fussed over her, eyes wide with forced affection. Emily rushed forward with a squeal, though her engagement ring was gone. And Ryan, once so smug, stood in the corner, looking pale and hollow-eyed. Over dinner, they bombarded her with questions. How's life in the city? Do you really get paid that much for a book? When's the movie coming out? They laughed, pretending the past never happened. Claire smiled politely, giving short answers. It was strange. She had imagined this moment 1,000 times, but it didn't bring the satisfaction she'd expected. Instead, she felt a calm detachment, like watching a play she'd already seen. As the evening wore on, Claire began to see cracks in the picture-perfect family she'd once envied. Ryan confessed his firm had gone bankrupt after a bad deal. Emily's engagement had ended after her fiancé's betrayal. Her father's voice trembled when he mentioned early retirement, and her mother kept glancing at the bills stacked on the counter. The mighty family that had once mocked her dreams now looked fragile, desperate. Claire didn't gloat. She didn't remind them of their cruelty. She simply smiled and said softly, "It's good to be home." But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning, because this time, she wasn't the quiet, humiliated girl they once dismissed. She was the woman they now envied, the one with power, success, and a story the whole world admired. And as she looked around that old dinner table, the same one that inspired her novel's title, she knew that the real Thanksgiving story hadn't been written yet. The next chapter, she thought, would be hers entirely. The next Thanksgiving came faster than Claire expected, yet everything about it felt different. The crisp November air, the golden leaves on the ground, the faint hum of chatter in the streets, all of it carried a quiet nostalgia, but also a sense of triumph. Just a year ago, she had left her parents' house humiliated and broken. Now, she was returning not as the family failure, but as a woman whose name was printed on every bookstore shelf in the country. Her debut novel, The Broken Table, had not only topped the bestseller lists, but had just been optioned for a major film deal. Her face had appeared in magazines, her words quoted by thousands online. Success hadn't changed her heart. It had only sharpened her understanding of people. And tonight, she was ready to face the very people who once broke her spirit. She parked in front of her parents' house, her new car gleaming beneath the porch light. Through the window, she could see her mother bustling around the kitchen and her father adjusting the dining table decorations. For a brief moment, Claire felt a twinge of sadness. This was the same home she'd grown up in, the same place where she'd learned to dream, and where those dreams had been mocked. She inhaled deeply, straightened her tailored coat, and walked to the door. When her mother opened it, her eyes widened in surprise. "Claire, you look incredible," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with exaggerated warmth. Her father followed behind, patting her shoulder awkwardly. "Our famous daughter," he said with a proud smile that didn't reach his eyes. Inside, the table was beautifully set. Candles, crystal glasses, silverware polished until they gleamed. Emily was already seated, wearing a strained smile, her once perfect life now shadowed by her recent divorce. Ryan sat beside her, thinner than before with tired eyes. His booming confidence was gone, replaced by something quiet, almost desperate. The tension in the air was thick, covered only by polite laughter and hollow compliments. Claire could feel it, the discomfort, the envy, the unspoken truth that the tables had turned. Throughout dinner, her parents praised her nonstop. "We always knew you had potential," her mother gushed, conveniently forgetting every cruel word from the past. Her father added, "Your success makes the whole family proud." Even Ryan tried to sound supportive, muttering, "Guess your little stories paid off after all." Claire smiled faintly, choosing silence over confrontation. Let them talk. She did not need to defend herself anymore. Her achievements spoke louder than their words ever could. But as the meal went on, the conversation began to shift. Her father cleared his throat and exchanged a glance with her mother. "Claire," he began carefully, "we're all so happy for you, truly. But we wanted to ask you something important." Her mother jumped in before he could finish. "You know your brother's business has been struggling since the firm closed, and your father's retirement fund took a big hit. Things have been difficult. We were wondering if you could help us out, maybe invest a little or lend some money, just until we get back on our feet." Claire froze for a moment, her fork hovering in midair. She looked around the table, realizing this was it, the moment they'd finally say what they really wanted. They didn't invite her to celebrate her success. They invited her because they needed her. The same people who once called her a failure now looked at her with pleading eyes. Her mother smiled nervously. "We supported you all those years, didn't we? It's only fair to help family now." Claire placed her fork down slowly, her movements calm, deliberate. "Do you remember last Thanksgiving?" she asked softly. The room fell silent. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Emily looked away. "When I said I finished my book and all of you laughed," she continued, "you told me I was wasting my life. You told me writing wasn't a real career. I went home that night and cried myself to sleep. But I also started rewriting my story. That story. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every time you made me feel small. I turned it into words, and those words changed my life." Her father frowned. "Claire, that's not fair. We were just joking." "No," she interrupted, her tone steady but cold. "You weren't joking. You were showing me what I meant to you. I was only valuable once I became useful to you." Her mother's eyes welled up. "Sweetheart, we didn't mean to hurt you. We just—" Claire stood up, her chair scraping softly against the floor. "You taught me the difference between love and convenience," she said quietly. "And I finally learned that love isn't conditional on success. You only remember family when it benefits you." She reached into her purse and placed a signed copy of her book on the table. "If you ever want to understand how I felt, read this. Every page is a mirror." The silence that followed was deafening. Her father's face tightened, Ryan looked ashamed, and Emily quietly wiped her tears. Claire took one last look around the table, the same table that once witnessed her humiliation, and felt no anger, only peace. "I'll always be grateful," she said softly, "because your cruelty made me stronger, but I can't fund your regrets." As she walked toward the door, her mother's voice broke behind her. "Claire, please. We need you." Claire paused at the threshold, turning just enough to meet her mother's eyes. "You needed me then too," she said gently. "You just didn't see it." Then she walked out into the cold November night. The air outside was crisp and freeing, like a weight lifting off her chest. She looked up at the stars, her breath forming little clouds in the darkness. The house behind her glowed with warm light, but it no longer felt like home. She smiled faintly, not out of joy or revenge, but out of closure. Later that night, in her apartment overlooking the glittering city skyline, Claire poured herself a glass of wine and lit a candle. The flicker of the flame danced across her desk as she opened her laptop. A blank document waited for her next story. She typed the title slowly, Thanksgiving Lessons. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before she began to write. This story, she decided, wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about self-worth, about learning to stop seeking validation from people who never believed in you. It would be about letting go, healing, and choosing peace over pain. As the words began to flow, Claire felt lighter than ever. The laughter that once haunted her was now just background noise, fading into the distance. She no longer needed her family's approval. She had found something greater, her own voice. And for the first time in years, she felt thankful.